Welcome, everyone. I'll just stand to give some different energy in the room. So I'd like to begin. It's a real privilege to be here on Garigal lands in Sydney. We had a beautiful welcome to country this morning. I'd like to acknowledge on behalf of the whole LDaCA team, what a privilege it is to be here, to acknowledge the guidance, cultural guidance, and looking after us while we're on country of the elders, past, present, and emerging as well. And for us, the connection to country is really important, and I think we'd always emphasise that in Australia, it's like something that's just not recognised. I can't understand it. We can't understand it. There's like 60,000 years of continuous culture here. There are so many languages. It's such a special part of the world. We should be really, really proud of it. There's a lot of work to be done, but we really should be proud of where we live in this part of the world. I'd also like to acknowledge the logo, which we're showing to you. I think it's one of the first times that we're showing it publicly. I feel a bit funny introducing it because it's really connected very intimately with Brother Grant here and also with Robert. It's actually designed by Dylan Sara, and it draws inspiration from the Burnett River petroglyphs. And there's a whole story behind it, which you can talk with Grant and Robert about. And these petroglyphs really contain Gurungurung communal knowledges. And there's a lot within those symbols. And it's really an honour and privilege for LDaCA to be building on those knowledges. The petroglyphs were actually jackhammered up in 1972. They were dispersed all throughout Queensland. We picked these things for a reason, because that really encapsulates the state of what happened to Indigenous languages in this country. And it was as deliberate as jackhammering. But the stories live on through people, and the people are reconnecting to those stories, and it's our privilege to be working with communities throughout Australia on those things. So I just wanted to briefly introduce the folk here that are presenting today. It's myself. So I had to introduce myself. I'm Haugh. I'm from UQ. I'm Professor of Linguistics and Applied Linguistics. We have Robert McLellan, who's a Gurungurung man, and also our program manager, doing a great job. And we have Moises Bonequi, who's our technology and data lead. But there's actually others in the room. We have quite a few of us, actually, so I won't be able to name everyone. But there's a number of other LDaCA people here today. So what is LDaCA? Essentially what we're doing is making nationally significant collections of language data accessible with appropriate community controls, right? So it's not open data, it's about connecting the data to people who need to be connected to the data, right? And there's all sorts of issues around authority and control and a lot of historical work, historical events to be worked through as we go through this. And we're developing a model for ensuring appropriate community control. And why are we doing this, right? So I always like to encourage people. I started at the beginning by saying, in Australia, it's a country where you have the oldest continuous cultures in the world. It's also a country in the region. There's about 7,000 languages spoken in the world, and about a quarter of them are spoken in Australia and its region. So that's extending out to the Pacific region, like Papua New Guinea and so on. So we're working with our partners in the Pacific as well on this. And so it's a really linguistically diverse part of the world. A quarter of the world's languages. It's a lot, right? So it's not just nationally significant, it's internationally significant. Although there's been a lot of language data collected, you wouldn't believe what happens to it. It's on USBs around people's necks because it's really precious. It's sitting on hard drives. It's sitting in all sorts of places, right? This is really, really precious material. I think one of the things about LDaCA is language. Language is both the thing we're studying, but language is also the tool by which we study things. So if you think about it really carefully, that means language itself is infrastructure. I'll give you a really specific example. right? So we're working with partners, ARDS, Aboriginal Corporation up in the Northern Territory. So we're working with them on culturally relevant and meaningful metadata schema. And so you kind of build on internationally accepted metadata schema, but they're limited, right? And they can't capture everything that those communities need in order to describe their collections. And so we're working with them on, I guess it's a two-tier thing, right? Rosanna and Simon and co, and Ben and others. So part of it's kind of like I think they decided English is a lingua franca across different language groups across the Northern Territory, but they're also working on a metadata schema, which is in Yolngu language. And that's theirs, right? So their choice is to develop it for themselves, and they may share it or they may not, but that's up to the community. So I think that encapsulates how we're trying to work across our community partners. And I'm also just thinking about language as infrastructure. Everyone talks about AI, right? And AI uses essentially machine learning, which is based on natural language processing, NLP. And the latest thing is using generative AI, which is based on large language models, right? So language is actually central to a lot of the tools we use when we're working with what the computer scientists call unstructured data, what I was going to say normal human beings. So non-computer scientists call text data, right? And so text these days can be written text. It can be spoken text, like audio recordings, video recordings, signed languages. So it really goes across the whole spectrum is what we're talking about today. And I think the thing that we want to emphasize in our overview, so Robert will be leading us through kind of the bigger problems that we're dealing with and the kind of streams of activity we have. And then we'll be moving to Moises, who will talk more about product. So we heard about HASS needs, mature HASS research infrastructure has product. It sounded in the discussion like we don't have any product, right? I don't know how you felt this morning, but we actually do have product that's tested at scale in terms of dealing with data at scale, like large amounts of data, but also deep diving into, does this product actually work for researchers and communities, right? So this is ongoing work, but we do think we have product. So Moises will be talking a lot about that. And then we'll be returning to Robert, who will talk about how we're kind of expanding and our future plans. So. Oh, yes. Sorry. I should introduce all our wonderful collaborators as well. So it's a bit hard to go through all the names here, but we have partners across a number of universities, ANU, QT, Melbourne, Sydney, I'm just trying to remember them, obviously, UQ as well, and ANU, yes, yeah. And also we're working with, I guess, industry as well. So probably our key industry partner along with ARNet is First Languages Australia as well. So we see, but it's quite a broad partnership and we're always looking to expand our partnerships. But, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so we're given the provocation or the structure to follow in terms of the first one being a problem statement. So I guess I'll share with you some of the high-level things, and then I might unpack that slightly more for you. So in terms of, I guess, our problem statement, we're looking at digital collections and the fact that they are growing faster than our ability to preserve them. And when I'm talking about digital collections, that's anything from research data through to cultural and linguistic materials as well. Too often, they are sitting in systems that are built on short-term funding, from research funding projects to projects. They may also be in proprietary formats, or there are also undocumented processes around that. So it can be a little bit of a challenge because as technology changes and priorities shift and time goes on, there's a real risk, and we are seeing that risk come to be actualized. We see data become inaccessible, and in some cases that data becomes lost. So that's part of the real problem that we face. Another underlying part in terms of governance, we could say it is not as strong as it needs to be, given the things that we face, the factors that we face in real everyday research problems. And those governance responsibilities, I guess, are also fragmented, which makes long-term custodianship quite difficult, and that's notwithstanding the conversation around storage as well, which is ongoing, enduring the conversation, if only the storage was as enduring as the conversation. And also too, without shared standards and open protocols, the real problem is that our digital heritage, it's at risk of being locked away instead of being a living, breathing, thriving, reusable resource for our futures. So that's the stuff that we're working with, and I will elaborate on it this is a common slide that we've shared quite broadly now, and I'll just walk you through it briefly. When we're looking at language data specifically, these are some of the things that we've come across. We know that data is amassed in certain collections, but it's also dispersed all over the place. It's also underutilised or at risk of being lost forever. In terms of tools, there's a lack of tools and skills for communities to truly derive research value from that data. When we look more specifically at tools, often they're like ad hoc tools or analytical methods. Also to annotation methods. The fact that they're ad hoc of nature, I guess, is really makes the reproducibility imperative difficult. The language data itself is rarely used or organised or described in reusable ways, and that is if it's described at all. I know in the Indigenous language data context, often much of the material that we find in dispersed places, more times than not, it is very poorly described, and then we see a whole lot of issues that follow in terms of trying to rematriate that back to its rightful owners. It is difficult to know what language data exists and where to find it generally. And in terms of processes for granting permissions or getting access to data, well, those processes are either absent or they're not easy to understand or apply. And finally, in terms of guides and training for collecting, handling and using data, they too often scattered and hard to find. It's not conclusive. And this is, I suspect this is ongoing, but we really just always share this in the interests of our findings thus far. I mean, you know, if you're finding that there's more to the language, more to the data challenge story, you know, I offer this as, I guess, a bit of conversation. So it's just stuff we've captured along the way. The significance of the problem, I'll extend on this. So, you know, if we're looking at, as I said before, research, anywhere from research data through to cultural and linguistic archives, the significance of it is that vast amounts of that digital material, even though it's in the digital state, it's at risk of being lost or not usable. You know, many of those collections are sitting in ad hoc systems, as I said, poorly documented or locked away in proprietary software. We kind of talked about this as the problem in the first instance, but it also is the significance of the problem, because that in itself is making data not usable. And, you know, technology changes, funding ends, you see that sort of come to a close. I think this just sort of talks about the earlier challenges, but in a slightly different lens. I mean, it's just emphasizing that the risks that were the problem statement before is actually a problem in itself. Yeah. Okay, so what are we, I guess, doing to address that problem? So we're looking at preserving digital and cultural collections. In doing that work, that extends to, you know, safeguarding knowledges, identities that inhere within that material, and also to the history for future generations and capturing that legacy around there. We're also looking at adopting open standards and clear governance. In doing that, we need to ensure that data remains accessible, that it remains reusable, and that it is trustworthy over time. Looking at past investments in research and infrastructure, it's important that we are considering a custodianship in a sustainable way for that material, but at the same time enabling new discovery, opportunities for collaboration and innovation also. And the other point there is around the fact that these problems are not just limited to technology. It goes beyond that. It's about keeping our collective memory alive, and also ensuring that those broad communities of which we're engaging with are able to maintain control and over what is their cultural heritage in a digital sense also. So if I slightly elaborate on this one is these are our activity streams within our project. The first one is around laying the foundations for a national language data repository, which we have. It's also not just about the technology, but the shared standards, governance and processes that make it work for everyone. The second one is around securing language collections that are at risk. So, we're looking at Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander languages. We're also looking at Pacific languages, migrant languages, different varieties of Australian Englishes, and sign languages also. The third stream is around the data portal. This is a central place where researchers and communities can discover and use collections that are spread across libraries, archives, museums, and other repositories, university repositories and others. The fourth one is about improving tools for analysing language data. This is so that people can work with spoken, written, signed and multimodal materials in ways that are transparent, in ways that are reproducible, and in ways that are genuinely useful for the communities in which we intend to serve, or the researchers intend to serve. So altogether, these streams are about building a strong strong and community-led systems that support and protect and connect language knowledge and make sure that it is accessible and that it's meaningful for generations to come. So that's the high-level view of what we're doing. I pass on to Moises.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert and Michael. So I'm going to talk about one of the achievements, which is around the LDaCA architecture. So just repeating what Robert said, we need to preserve digital and cultural collections. We need to adopt open standards and have clear governance. We need to have sustainable stewardship to protect our investments. And how are we addressing that? So how are we implementing our work? We designed the protocols for implementing long-term archival repository services. So these are designed to work in low-resource environments. This allows communities to have agency and control over their materials. And we need to prioritize sustainability, simplicity, standardization, linked data, description, and clear licensing over all the other fancy features. In some, data is portable and not locked into particular storage systems. Data can be stored and described in system based on open specifications. And these services, like authorized access interface, catalog, search engines, can be built and rebuilt with these data storage systems using open source software solutions. So what is exactly PILARS? Is a framework of protocols to design sustainable archival systems. It supports fair and care. The goals are to reduce autonomy, to reduce reliance on locked proprietary systems. And they're sustainable, so they ensure long-term access and preservation, and they maximize return on investment in data and infrastructure. So what are they? So one, on the right, you have, we use general purpose commodity storage system. We organize data into storage objects with files, metadata, and checksums. We support persistent IDs. We store the documentation within the storage root. And we prefer open standard file formats. That's one, data portability. And the second one is metadata and annotation. So each of these objects that I talk about have descriptive, provenance, rights, and metadata. We use linked data standards. We include the license, files, and checksums within the data. And we try to represent higher structure, like collections. The third is governance. We need to define and document your repository mission. We need to establish policies, agreements with depositors, and we need to plan for data persistency and the accessing. So these are the pillars. So how did we implement the pillars in LDaCA? So one, data is portable. We use the Oxford Common File Layout specification, which is an independent approach to the storage of digital information in a structured, transparent, and predictable manner. It is designed itself to promote long-term management and best practices within the repositories. And then the diagram here, you see the storage root. And within that storage root, we have what are called OCFL objects, and which are directories. And these directories contain files and other directories. These are versioned, and they identify with unique IDs. So how does this storage look like? Objects are stored in the repository. Each object in our storage file system is an arrow crate. A research object crate is a package that has metadata file that describes the collection with the files and its license. This special file describes the collections and the links to the license. In this case, we have one collection containing items such as an interview, and you see the licenses, you see all the links to the other objects, and that's how it's represented. So how do we do IDs? This diagram represents, sorry, it's too small to see, but it represents our identifying strategy. LDaCA can begin establish repository infrastructure without having a PID in place by using a thing called archive and packaging IDs, which are globally unique, they're searchable, and zero management overhead. They don't resolve to a browser, so we recommend that the top-level datasets have a unique identifier, a DOI, for the collection. So, and this diagram, so the second part is the annotation, or metadata annotation. This diagram shows our metadata stack. So I can walk through in big scale. We have an arrow crate metadata schema based on the style of schema.org. So schema.org is an international standard that defines how to describe data and digital objects in a consistent and machine-readable way. Building on that, we have the Language Data Commons metadata schema. This is a customized extension of the schema above, and it had terms and structure that are specific to language data. And this was built within the LDaCA team with all people that know what we're talking about around language. And those terms are defined in that URL. From that schema, we develop what is called a Language Data Commons arrow crate profile document. This is our key guidance on how the collection is structured, and it provides a human guidance. A second is a syntax summary, which defines the actual rules. These rules can generate just those artifacts that which allow us to configure editor tools do validation and stuff like that for our requirements. So we start from a standard, the schema.org, and we have our big important bit, our profile. And with that, we develop validation tools or automation tools. So these are, this is just a screenshot of our schemas, which are available to the public. So following on with the annotation, what you see here is a playground using an editor tool called Cradle as a component. We designed this so arrow crates can be edited without with these configuration files I talked about, so users don't need to know about the arrow crates. This is a component-based single-page application. It is also installed as a GitHub pages to allow users to describe their own datasets. It has autocomplete fill-ups, like your organization, language fill-ups, geolocalization fill-ups, and stuff like that. You can also use spreadsheets because most of the metadata, to describe your dataset, because most of the researchers use spreadsheets, to describe the metadata. It needs to be in a compatible way. So the core idea of LDaCA is to develop standardized methods for describing and organizing data. This diagram overviews the architecture by focusing on findability. We have storage services at the bottom using the storage object that I'm talking about. We have an API layer, which is secure, that can bootstrap the storage services. And it also highlights how data is distributed across multiple storage services. We anticipate that this language data could be stored in different places or hosted by different institutions. So the product that Michael was talking about is one of them is portals. We have portals that can be built out on automation on demand for other communities. We have a main portal where we add data and collection for language data. At the moment, we batch load them into scripts into a staging area, and then they're indexed. We design API first portals with secure access for analysis or downloads. So sorry about this slide. It's a condensed slide about the approach of the access controls that we have implemented. We can go in more detail in this one if you like. But we have a distributed access control system that leverage authentication using AAF, but is independent to the authorization services. The key features are that the access control is license-based. You have your license that we talked about before on the package. We have enforcement points in the repository level, and we have interoperable protocols to negotiate access. The motivation of this access control is to be fair, but access control, and see how we can scale it up. And the workflow is simple, is user request access. You have your credentials, your licenses are presented, you have an enforcement point, and the data store. We have an authorization server that we can be polled and updated. And we have a decision point to check at the license. And we also have auditing and logging for revocation to ensure governance. This is just came up this diagram to show how can we say who I am and what am I allowed to see. For example, on the right, we have access to a Jupyter notebook. We then request the data automatically via APIs, and you authenticate via CI Logon. CI Logon is our identity and access management platform that allows users to use their own credentials. They can use AF, EduGain, and on other socials. And on the right, we're working with the CADRE project, which is the Coordinated Access for Data Researchers and Environment, and which is a shared platform that users can request access to sensitive data. This way we address the governance, creation and management of sharing data for research. We have a service, LDaCA and CADRE have a service agreement to provide those access controls. Behind CADRE, what they use is a tool called Resource Entitlement Management System to manage these access rights. Basically means it's a license-based authorization, means that you're licensed to access the sensitive materials if there are. We still have lots to do in the project. We need to fix our bugs, maintain our tools, do UX improvement, talk to the researchers. We need to design and implement complete workflow for interactive deposits. We need more data, more language data collections, and we need more notebooks and tools, and we need to communicate the LDaCA approach like we're doing now. And then I'm gonna talk about some of the key learnings and future plans and pass on to Robert. So when we are building websites and dashboards, for example, you're doing data visualization, you focus on delivery. Getting it work quickly or on time and within scope. Decisions are made for speed and appearance, not for long-term sustainability. Code and data are often tied to one person or one tool or one tech stack. And so what began as a useful tool can become a fragile and unmaintained system that's hard to update and reuse. So on the right, you see we're trying to shift here. From quick delivery to long-term value and maintainability. So the systems are built with open standards, clear documentation, modular design, data and code are portable, not tied to one person or platform or vendor. And we have governance and licensing and preservation are considered from the beginning, not after launch. So maintenance is part of the design. No? So changes are expected and not disrupted. And the result is that the system endures beyond individual projects and people, supporting continuous reuse and adaptation. And next up, we have Robert.
Thank you. So in sharing some of these key learnings, I mean, I think we're learning every day as we continue on, and it's really hard to concisely just put that all into the 1 hour, but I've just picked maybe some things to share with you, mindful that we're standing between you and afternoon tea, and then we're also presenting back to back straight after afternoon tea in the late afternoon slot. So we're going to have to do a comedy trio after afternoon tea. Look, I just picked a few that I wanted to share with you in the hope that it helps or provokes some conversation. Again, we're going to pick more of these after afternoon tea. But the first one I wanted to share with you was really, which I think is obvious, but maybe not to some, but Indigenous data contains Indigenous knowledges, whether or not those original knowledge holders were appropriately acknowledged for that, or if they were just they were watered down to merely informants while a non-Indigenous person was conferred another PhD on the basis of Indigenous knowledge. But that doesn't happen anymore. The point about that is that Indigenous knowledge is inhere within these collections, and that is dispersed a multiplicity of different locations. So this diagram displays some of those places in which those Indigenous knowledges reside. But and I guess that we're sort of sharing that because these are some of the places that we have come across it, particularly in our outreach and engagements. But also, as previously mentioned, often there is an incomplete documentation of the knowledges that exist within the data there. So it's integral that we become effective at connecting that data back to Indigenous knowledge holders wherever they may be. So it's quite a, it just speaks to the point that, you know, it can be dispersed everywhere, it can be amassed in collections, but, you know, there's no one single place where it resides. Okay, the next one, I just want to give you a quick little update on maybe two things I'm going to highlight. The first one is around a collaboration between LDaCA and NASLA, and NASLA is the National and State Libraries Australasia. We have been doing a little bit of work together to improve community-driven digital access to library collections, especially materials which contain Indigenous cultural intellectual property. So we started off with a small pilot project which you know, in effect delivered a series of roundtables where the goal was to identify a small shared pilot project that could demonstrate good practice in access, rights management and collaboration also. So I just want to share with you a few key learnings from that. Some of the things that came out was that the idea of access, rights and infrastructure, these are shared challenges across the institutions. There was a lot of voice put towards the importance of the role in communities leading and institutions being able to support that in whatever way that takes shape. The other thing that came to the front was that a need for coordination across those institutions, particularly on how they engage with communities, because for mob, there can often be this fatigue where you're getting asked repeatedly by different institutions, you're getting asked the same questions, saying the same thing, but you're not necessarily seeing a translation of that across that as a sector. So it really talked about that sort of collaborative responsibility in engaging with communities. It also talked about the need for two-way, both way sort of benefit sharing, which we know is an integral part of care. And also it talked about a genuine progress in this space relies on, you know, transparency, but also coupling that with adhering to cultural protocols and governance systems that already exist in those communities that they're engaging with. So that was the first one. And the second one I want to give as an example is a little bit different, but again, this similar thing. So one of our partners and colleagues, Rose Barracliff, led this roundtable at the start of the year. And we were speaking specifically around AI, and this was a gathering of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander researchers, technologists, artists, community leaders, a broad range of people attended this roundtable. And there's a communique that has been established from it. To put it short, go and read the communique, it's very good, but it's, put it short, you know, it's talking about the importance of you know, AI systems must be in whatever way possible governed by Indigenous peoples in order to embed cultural authority, protocols, consent, that kind of thing. It also must be grounded in Indigenous knowledge systems. It must be built for collective benefit, and it must be inclusive and participatory. So you can sort of see a little bit of an overlap in, I'm sharing this as an example because two separate spaces, but there's a similarity in the discourse that's coming forward. I just want to briefly share some of that similarity. We're talking about, you know, Indigenous governance by design. They've got to be part of that. The second part is talking about authority and cultural protocols. That is sitting there in both conversations. Also, the idea of infrastructure as a means of self-determination. And I think that one coming out of both of those two examples is something that I think stops us in our tracks for one moment, because that is everything that we do. particularly in our engagement here. It's something that's certainly close to my heart, because Rosie said at the start of this session, we're a people organisation. You know, it's our members that we're serving. The same way for us. It's people data that is at the centre of what we do at LDaCA, and I'm sure, well, most of the humanities and social sciences, yeah. So this one really just brings that glaringly to the front. Again, collective benefit came up in both conversations. The need for building capacity and participation in these conversations and design moving forward was very important, and also the imperative of ethics. So that sort of came up in both. I'll finish on this slide, which is really just an opportunity to emphasise a few things. As we're going about this journey, oh, we've got a little bit of it. Oh, that's okay, I'm running ahead. Well, I'll slow down. Were you on questions or no? Okay.
We've got 5 minutes left. That's what.
This one is really around the importance of, call it what you want, we're kind of calling it community champions, people out in the ground who might be the key people to further these conversations with us, to further some of the actual data work with us. So we have representatives of those respective communities working alongside us, and we can support them. That might be determined by that community, might be a younger person with interests of being, you know, skilled with the tools and the infrastructure that we're building. So we're always looking to support that. We'll talk after break about some of the hands-on fellowship work that we're doing with key people and the opportunities within LDaCA. So we'll talk about that too. But it speaks to that, and it also highlights that there's an imperative for data literacy. And that's been spoken more broadly. I know we've got colleagues in the room working in that space too. It's important because in Indigenous context, we talk about a seat at that table, but equally it is important to be able to engage in the conversations at that level. And we'll talk about building up that awareness and capability, and that's that area too. So I just wanted to emphasise that too moving forward. Particularly in the road mapping conversations around capabilities out in those different regional areas, not forgetting that there are people out there too, and a lot of the data is not just constrained to the metropolitan areas. So, and one of the things that we are doing is a project with the Haugh field notes, where we will be rematriating material back out to community and starting to enrich that data set with communities and seeing how they would like that reflected in the infrastructure that we're building. So I share this triadic network there because that features again with the work that we're doing. I think it's important to understand that the three roles: the role of the data owner, the data custodian, and the data steward. And the relationship of that as that continues on. So that will be prominent in our Haugh project, and we'll start to elaborate on how we can see that the Indigenous communities who are contained in that data can actually have assert authority, assert governance in a practical way through negotiations with the current data owner of that material. That's it. Yep. We'll finish there. Thank you very much. Please take any questions. Questions?
Thanks. I just want to go a bit further on the Haugh project, which is wonderful. So you've got Tom Watson and Gary Tudor-Smith, who are Gungaloo people, relearning their language. They've been able to get access to these materials directly from the son of the linguist. They didn't have to go through a holding institution in Australia. If they had tried to get this material from a holding institution in Australia, they probably couldn't, or it would take 2 or 3 years to get access to it. So it's a great example. And they're also using Ningarn, which is a tool that we're building as part of LDaCA, which is a way of transcribing these manuscripts in a secure environment. So yeah, one of the big problems I think for a lot of Aboriginal people is actually getting access to the materials in their language, because the holding institutions have become so risk averse in giving access to that material.
So are there other questions? Or you just really want some cake? I don't know. I really want some cake. But, you know, don't let us stop you from questions.
Any other questions? Yes.
So, Professor Richard Sennett from the University of Melbourne, how rich are the querying capabilities for the various portals you're building? Is it entertainment or retain collections which have it? Or can you say, show me the etymology or the dialects across the various languages and show me how they compare? How deep, or is it more just like a catalog? You type in something and it'll come back with these are all the matches. Can you do richer joins? I guess that's what I'm asking.
I think the search is as rich as the metadata you provide, and the catalog, we try to, in the profile, we try to identify what sort of questions the researchers might have. It has simple text-based search, and it has advanced search with normal query language. But we have, for example, we have Simon here that did went to the researcher and see how that portal might benefit for their research or answer some questions. But I think it's when it tries to specific questions, that's why we also developed the API access. So we're also developing example notebooks where this is part of the infrastructure, so making notebook with specific analytical tools. And I think Monica as well is going to, after our short, is going to answer what those questions can sound out with the analytical tool that the SIH people are building.
Okay, thanks.
Someone up the back. I'll go first. Sorry. I was just thinking about this when you mentioned, is it for, like researchers to be analysing the different languages and that? But I was thinking more of the other end of the spectrum of, is it for the people themselves, for the local traditional custodians of that area, wanting to find out about their languages? And, because we know the history in Australia, that a lot of people have been removed from their countries and so forth. So is it for them finding their language again, or is it for researchers to research it? That's the question.
One of the things we talked about in the early stages of the project was around the framing of the purpose of LDaCA, and it's to make, data discoverable and usable for academic and non-academic use. And then we went, don't like the sound of that, because what's non-academic? And so where we're at in our journey is that we're making data discoverable and usable, etc., for research both within the university and outside of the university also. And often it's both, a bit of both, crossover. But to answer that question directly, it's for researchers who might be mob in their community wanting to do research, or mob coming from a community research background who want to derive value from their data for those community determined priorities. That's what it's about first and foremost. And it's also an opportunity to bring data to those community groups, data that concerns those community groups, and give them the opportunity to take ownership over that or assert some sort of voice in the way that data is described. Because often when the data comes to us, that voice is missing. We know with all that language data challenges and poorly described and poor metadata and the rest of it, there's an important voice missing from it. So it's a bit of both. But the first research imperative would be by those people who that data concerns. You know, they might choose to make it open and available for reusability by other researchers if it's going to benefit that community, or they might not, you know, but that's up to them.
Hi, I'm Alice. I'm an assistant curator at UTS Gallery. I'm really interested in how you were describing like accessibility. I think you kind of just answered my question. You were mentioning the community decides whether they have that knowledge open or closed, because I was just thinking about restricted knowledge. When I worked at the NGA, one of the main issues with First Nations data on our content management was this idea that maybe it's not for everyone. And so our First Nations curator was really advocating for it not to just be on Teams for everybody. And that was something that I still bring with me, and I'm still trying to figure out in our small collection here at UTS Gallery. I guess, first of all, making it operable and portable is like way beyond our current capacity, but I'm just wanting to know your examples of like restriction on knowledge, but also variability. You were talking about like description, like for example, places have a lot of variability of names, like place names, and that gets updated with community knowledge. And how do you deal with that in a small team, I guess?
Like, I guess one example is we're working with the Arts Aboriginal Corporation, where we have an example in the showcase later, where what they would like is to have following the same principles, and they don't even want to be accessible in the internet. So it will be a guided access where you go and sit with a community leader and show you where you can access the data. So it's all on a case-by-case basis. That's one example with the arts